You're listening to Dodge Movie Podcast. Your hosts are Christy and Mike Dodge, the founders of Dodge Media Productions. We produce films and podcasts, so this is a podcast about films. Join them as they share their passion for filmmaking.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Dodge Movie Podcast. Today we are going to talk about the 1988 film Miracle Mile. It is the 119th episode of this podcast, and we watched this on Apple TV, but it is also available on Amazon Prime for $3.99, or if you're willing to sit through ads, you can watch it on Pluto TV. It's written and directed by Steve DeJarnatt. He also wrote Strange Brew, and he directed Cherry 2000 with Melanie Griffith, who we talked about last week. It stars Anthony Edwards, Mare Winningham, John Agar, Lou Hancock, Kurt Fuller, and Denise Crosby. The DP was Leo Van de Sande, and he did Volcano in 97 and Blade in 98. The synopsis for this film is a young man hears a chance phone call and telling him that a nuclear war has started and missiles will hit his city in 70 minutes. So the tagline is very succinct with that. It says, "You just found out you have 24 hours to live. What are you going to do?"
All right. I think that effectively captures the spirit of the film.
Mm-hmm. So welcome back, Dustin and Lisa.
Hi. Thanks for having us.
And let's see. Oh, it took Steve 8 years to get this movie made, is my little bit of trivia. Mike, I'm going to have you kick us off with your pickup line, and then Dustin, I'm going to have you talk about this film.
I never really saw the big picture before, not till today. That works pretty well with my theory.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you know Mike's theory that the first line of the movie tells you what I should...
Kind of establishes the narrative question for the film.
Foreshadowing. What?
Gotcha.
It doesn't always, it's not always true, but it is sometimes.
Yeah, I could see
well,
that.
as a screenwriter, you really want your first line to be good, for sure. Yeah.
So we kind of test that. And I would say we're at 95%.
I think it's most likely holds true. And like you said, I think from a storytelling perspective, you want to jump into the action as late as possible. So that makes sense. The first line was something that actually means something. Not always true, but generally so.
Nice.
So why are you drawn to this film?
Well, let's start. I mean, this is part of the yuppie nightmare cycle that we've been talking about all month for reasons that will become apparent as soon as you see it or hear the premise even, which is one of the great premises of all time. You said that it took Steve many years to make this movie, and I think that, I mean, I should know better for obvious.
Yeah.
Lisa and I know Steve.
Yeah, we've met him.
Yeah, he's a friend.
Cool.
And so we've talked to him about this movie, and I think he was offered muchos dineros to sell the script because he was kind of an untested young filmmaker and really wanted to make it. And so wouldn't sell it unless he could direct it. And thank God he did, because it's a brilliant screenplay, and Steve is just an amazing writer. That's kind of what he's done since he sort of left making films full time. He's become a fiction writer, and he's a very good fiction writer. But beyond how good the screenplay is, you know, this movie is much like Into the Night, which we talked about a couple weeks ago. This movie is just a masterpiece of like tone and style and mood, and it has its own dream logic that's there not only in the screenplay and the story, but in the music by Tangerine Dream and the cinematography and the sets and how he uses all those things and the parade of amazing character actors that he gets to fill out his cast. This movie is like the king of, it's one of those movies where you'll recognize every face that you come across. You won't know their names, but you'll be like, oh, I know that guy. That guy's been in 1,000 movies. And it's just, it's a whole parade of those kinds of actors. But starting with the premise, which is one of the great premises ever, it's basically what would happen if you answered a phone, a payphone, and on the other end of the phone was a guy saying, missiles have been launched. We fired our missiles at Russia. We're going to get it back in 90 minutes. Oh my God, what am I going to do? And then the phone disconnects. Do you think it's a prank call because it's a public payphone and it's just some random call? Do you think it's a real call that the guy actually had the wrong number and that you've just heard a real warning about the imminent end of the world? And are you willing, if you do think it's a prank call, are you willing to take the chance that that's what it is? Or are you going to use those 90 minutes to try to do something important to get out of the city, to save your life, to save the life of the girl you've fallen in love with, which is another key question of the movie, because the movie is really a love story at the end of the day. It's a love story masquerading as an end-of-the-world thriller. So there's all kinds of things we could talk about with this one. I mean, it's a very 80s, end of the 80s movie. It's a very Cold War reflective movie. It's hard to imagine now, or maybe not so much anymore, because we're kind of entering a new era of a Cold War, thanks to our conflict with Russia and China. But this was an era where those of us that kind of grew up in the 80s will remember, like, nuclear war, like you hide under your desk, you know, and sort of like fear around getting bombed. There were TV movies like The Day After that was about like the aftermath of a nuclear explosion. All the action movies of that era were about chasing villains that were going to like detonate nuclear weapons. And it was just a real fear in the air. And this movie was sort of a great scenario kind of climax for that at the end of the 1980s. But again, it's like it's a MacGuffin to get the story moving, and you know, to raise this question of what do you do with the last 90 minutes of your life.
Yes. You spoke of The Day After, and I just looked it up. It came out in 83, so I was 12 years old. That movie terrified me.
Yeah.
I mean, I have vivid memories of that movie and just feeling hopeless.
Yeah.
And if I were to receive the news reports, that he doesn't like me to say this, I was like, I would just run out the door. I wouldn't even try. I did not want to be Jo Beth Williams in the basement dying of cancer. I was just like, let's end it quick. If that's what we're looking at. I mean, I'm sorry to get so morbid, but that movie affected me hugely. And so
yet you like A Quiet Place, which is a film all about a person who is doomed, who's hanging on by
not if they could stay away from the monsters. But I appreciate the filmmakers that told a story where you couldn't make noise.
Right. Sure.
Not to. But when because I listened to a YouTube, I'm so excited that you guys know him, because I mean, he's a man after my own heart. I felt like I got a little bit of a prepper vibe from him. Like he still seems like someone who's still very afraid of this happening. I mean, he lives in a small town up in Washington, and he seemed like he's kind of trying to hide out. Which
Steve DeJarnatt, you mean?
Yes. It is. Did you not?
No, I mean, I think Steve's from the Northwest originally.
Okay. So he didn't go hide. He already lived there.
No. I mean, he lives in a beautiful part of Puget Sound, and I think he also has a place in LA, or he goes back to LA a lot because he still works. Yeah, I don't know about the whole sort of like the nuclear bomb element of it, and I don't know how much of that is key to his thoughts around making this movie, so much as wanting to position a love story within this kind of great framework, this real-time framework of suspense and tension. And,
Well, he said that he was highly influenced by the drills and everything. And so I guess I misread. It seemed like he was someone who was living with a lot of fear and
yeah, I'm sure he was, just by nature of being a guy in his 20s in the 80s, right? Like being an adult.
Yeah,
and
we were all
being a
supposed
young
to be
adult
terrified.
in the 80s. Yeah, for sure.
See,
But
I didn't really get that. That was not a clear and pressing danger for me.
In your life or in this film?
No, in general, growing up in that era. I mean, yeah, everybody talked about it, but
Oh my gosh.
that was, for me, there were far more dangerous things locally that I could worry about. I never got that. I didn't go see The Day After. I had no interest in that film. It just didn't, like, it wasn't part of
it was on TV.
it was a TV movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how scared I was either during that era, because as a kid, you do have other. I mean, I was you have bullies to fight.
Right. Yeah.
School,
Yeah.
they're not. It's not a clear and present danger. Or
The guy
Gorbachev
with one eyebrow is going to beat you up for your lunch money.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
More so that it just created the Cold War created an ever present era of kind of doom and gloom over national politics.
Part of the background, part of the wallpaper.
Yeah, certain angst, I guess. Maybe.
Yeah, it's a paranoid movie, right? Miracle Mile is an extremely paranoid movie. Like, he's constantly changing his story. He tells the one person it's a plant meltdown. Yeah. Then he tells somebody it's like a chemical that got into the wind. Yeah. And there's plenty of reasons that he can give as to why the world might be ending, and everybody he talks to immediately believes it.
But does it matter, though, what the reason is? This is kind of what you're getting at. He tells everybody a different reason. And to get back to Lisa's dream thing, is that it very much felt like that, right? Because he woke up late somehow, and then that's dream logic, right? Is I have this, oh my gosh, I got to get there. And it doesn't always be the same thing. It can morph over the dream of why you're running to get someplace. So that kind of made some dream sense.
Well, and much like in Into the Night, as we talked about a couple of weeks ago, there's an opportunity in this movie to think, has he woken up? Right? Because he goes to sleep to, refresh himself for their date later that night, misses his alarm for various reasons, and is he awake?
Right.
We can't really be sure.
Yeah. For folks that haven't seen it, we keep talking about the love story. We should mention that the reason he doesn't just flee the city is that he wants to go, and he meets a woman earlier that day who he falls in love with.
Really
played
adorable,
by Mare.
meet cute, actually.
Yeah,
I
Mare
love the
Winningham.
meet cute,
The whole first 15 minutes of the movie is a romantic comedy.
Yeah.
And it feels very lovely and sun-drenched to me. I love the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah, and he decides that he's not going to leave the city without who he thinks is the love of his life. So he has to go and find Mare Winningham and then get out. And the movie unfolds in real time. So he really only has an hour and 10 minutes to pull this off. Tense. And the longer he waits and the longer the movie unfolds, of course, the more people have heard about it because the story has started to spread. And so the more panic starts to arise around him, which impedes his progress in getting out of the city, to the point where at the end of the movie, it's mayhem in the streets and you can barely move.
We're talking about this paranoia and the building of it over the movie, and this time watching it, I've seen it a few times. This time watching it, it actually did feel more relevant today to me. Yes. I was really feeling it this time in a way I hadn't ever before, partially just because of the way things are right now and the way things become viral and people feel maybe a little more paranoid or panicked. Watching that crowd scene where Anthony Edwards gets up on the car and it hit me a little bit more because of the way things are now, I think than it has in the past.
Yeah, I think
felt
it did
more relevant
too for me because we saw not to bring up, but the whole toilet paper thing, it didn't make sense. Right. But I found myself trying to maybe we need toilet paper.
Yeah, I know, me
you
too.
Just get caught up in it.
Yeah.
And I kept going but why? This is
it felt really relevant.
Respiratory thing, not a
right. Why do we need toilet paper?
Why are we buying toilet paper?
Yeah,
herd mentality.
To get back to what Dustin was saying earlier, though, I think that at that time there was a lot of post-apocalyptic stories, be it fiction and movies. Probably because people thought that nuclear war was coming, but there was a big surge, and I feel like that's come back.
Yeah,
I would expect that 90% of student films are post-apocalyptic.
I think that's.
They were 5 years ago when I was in film school.
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
Every little read that we would do in a post-apocalyptic world.
Right, and so this film, at least the back half, reminded me a lot of some of those other 80s films. I want to say Night of the Comet was one of them.
Yeah, big time.
Such a
Love
great movie.
Night of the Comet.
Yeah. And so it's again, LA, things have collapsed, the grid is gone or what have you.
Yep.
And we all have to. And then there was another one that involved, I think, rollerblading, or roller skating. That wasn't quite as good a film. But there were a lot of that, into the world stuff. And I know people who really got into that, not so much as a prepper themselves, but that fiction, and that's probably that mindset of, if civilization collapses. But some of that, though, is a little bit crazy because I don't know if you could get a helicopter today if you wanted one in in 30 minutes.
Yeah.
So some of that was maybe dreamlike.
Sure.
That and of course I don't know if bodybuilders are traditionally helicopter pilots. Again, things that are more dreamlike in that setting. But I think that spoke to people's, like, the reaction to that.
Yeah.
What would you do? Well, I think the answer is most people lose their mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
We saw that.
I thought another interesting thing about that paranoia and watching it unfold is, like, you start to think about, has Anthony Edwards caused this, right? And there's a moment,
I thought that too.
There's a moment in the movie where he questions himself on that, right? And it's a really interesting, like, did I make this happen?
Ooh, like,
Well, that's the beautiful question that hangs over the whole film, which is,
100%.
what if he's wrong?
Right.
Because if he's
Yep.
wrong and it really was a prank call, then he's responsible for a lot of death.
Yes.
And,
Right,
you could argue the
destruction.
person that made the prank call is, but he's also responsible for a lot of death and destruction that has happened if this bomb never comes.
I just found myself really reacting to that so much this time watching it, and I've watched it at least 3 times.
Yeah.
So,
and he
yeah.
grapples with that, you're right, in the third act.
Yeah.
It's a really... Anthony Edwards is one of those actors that's not talked about a lot, even though he's been in a lot of big stuff like ER and Top Gun.
Yeah.
But he was really good in this era at playing these kind of naive stand-up guys, but like really like Bambi, right? Like, like they call him Bambi in Gotcha, which is a comedy he made.
so
But
good.
you know, he was really good at playing these kind of like straightforward, like good guys that were, who were really gullible.
Sort of
Wasn't that his
hapless a
character
little
in
bit.
Revenge of the Nerds?
Yeah, Revenge of the Nerds. That's a great example
Yeah.
of, and he was really great. It's a really good casting. Like, I think, I'm trying to remember, I should know better because I've read whole books about this movie, but I think like Nicholson was maybe considered for this part. And there were like some big names
there were.
that were attached, and
remember
actors
seeing
that like would really not have been as good, because like Jack Nicholson in this part would have,
Can you
it would have
imagine?
stripped a lot of the
Yeah.
suspense out of it, because it's hard to believe that Nicholson would not be in control. Right. Like,
Yeah.
Right.
but like Anthony Edwards really feels like he's in over his head
Yeah.
from the very beginning. Yeah.
Right.
He's really good in this movie.
I love him in
Yeah.
this movie. Him and Mare Winningham, I think they're just lovely.
They're really good.
Poor Mare Winningham has maybe the worst haircut in
Yeah.
movie history
It's
in
really
this, and I know
unfortunate.
Steve's aware of that. And
I will mention, we're talking about Denise Crosby.
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
She was in Star Trek The Next Generation,
Yep.
in which Jonathan Frakes, who's now a director,
Yep.
he famously played a trombone. His character did, but
Oh, yes,
Frakes
he
does
did.
himself.
Yeah.
Anthony Edwards does not play the trombone.
In real life.
You can
mean.
tell.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
When he is supposedly, and this drives me nuts with filmmakers. And so I also brought up a lovely woman, Blake Lively, in Sister of the Traveling Pants. She plays
brought
an
this up
award-winning
so much.
soccer player, and she runs around
can't
on
play
screen
soccer.
and has obviously never run before her in her entire life, which is fine, but then don't show us.
Right.
It took me out of the film when he was supposedly a professional musician, and I'm just, whoa. Like, that doesn't
clearly
even
doesn't
match
play.
the music. This is nuts. So
it's a budget thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like if you can afford to like send your actor away for 6 months to
help him
learn
learn
whatever it
how to
is,
play
but
something.
Miracle Mile was made for like 5 cents, right? They didn't.
right on, brother.
They couldn't get
No.
trombone lessons. That was not in the budget.
Tutorials,
Yeah.
right.
yeah, I don't know. Maybe shoot it a little different, but that's not a criticism of Edwards. It's just something I noticed is like,
Something that takes
that's
you
not-
out of it.
that's- Yeah. And that's again one of the things that bumps me.
It's great casting because
Yeah.
he wasn't like your leading man, like,
Or
you know,
action
like Tom
hero.
Cruise.
Tom
He
Cruise,
was the
yeah.
friend, right?
Or like an action hero.
Oh,
Right.
but-
yeah.
But he kind of is
the
put
side
in
He's an
that.
everyman.
I actually made a note. Not a fan of Julie's hair.
Poor
Yeah,
Julie.
I think it's something that in every Q&A he's ever done about this
Yeah.
movie that Steve has to laugh over, because, you know, it was the 80s. It's a mullet.
Right.
It was, I mean, I don't know how often you saw that cut on women, but it must not have come out of nowhere.
Yeah.
So
Right.
Well-
it's an unfortunate cut for Miss Winningham, who is a phenomenal
Yeah,
actress.
but
Yes.
to her credit, I think she's still very likable, and you
Oh,
can see
absolutely.
like
Yeah.
very appealing, very attractive. You can see where it's coming from, right? Even with the
Yeah,
haircut.
the chemistry is there.
Yeah,
It certainly
definitely.
works.
I kind of, I know this is kind of going back a little bit, but that opening scene in the diner where we're kind of meeting all the characters. And like you said, the waitress, she's like, I know I've seen that lady before, and she's so iconic. And we're meeting all of the people in like were they sanitation workers and then Denise comes in, her character comes in. And so we're just trying to kind of find who are these people. And it seems like everybody is just so nonchalant when he tells them. They're not worked up. And I guess you wouldn't be.
Well, think about, you just answered your own question, which is that think about who would be in a diner in Los Angeles in the middle of the night, right? It's this collection of oddballs, right? Yeah. It's the two sanitation workers. It's the strange businesswoman who's reading like cliff notes of
Thomas Pynchon.
Yeah, it's the woman dressed like a flight attendant who we later find out is not a flight attendant. She's an actress. Yeah, it's just all these like peculiar people who are the last people perhaps that you would want to be the only people with the knowledge of the impending apocalypse.
Right.
Like there's a great moment where, so they're all fleeing in that truck, right?
Yeah.
And there's a great moment where one of the sanitation workers, and I think it's the waitress maybe, they're sitting together and they're like, we have to think of the people we need to save.
Like
who are the great minds of the world? And it's like, these are probably not the two people we want to come up with the list of the great minds of the world.
That is very funny.
Yes, that was...
So it's just there's such a great group of characters played by just an amazing group of character actors.
Definition of ragtag, perhaps.
There's a clip on YouTube that I will put in the show notes, and they reunited in the diner a few years ago.
Actors,
yeah, and it's great.
So
them
good.
talking about it. And Steve came down and he's wearing his Seahawks,
Seahawks,
it was great.
I'm wondering though, if when it came out at the time, did that play more normally? Because in the 80s, if somebody said, "Oh, there's a nuclear apocalypse in 90 minutes," and people did have a go bag and they did have a plan, but like, because I thought of the cook at the diner, he was very nonchalant. I was like, "Okay, here's what we got to do. Okay, you get that shelf."
He quickly like jumped up on the counter and he was like, "All right."
But there was no time that he took to plan anything. He had a plan already. Like, it was like, okay, we're going to have to get tomato cans over here and beans over there. So in that era where people just like, oh, that would be normal. If we were all going to get nuked by the Ruskies, then we knew exactly what to go do. Or at least some people would have that. Maybe not everyone. But I did notice it broadcast somehow throughout the city. Right? Yeah. In theory, he just told the people in the diner, but then their friend told their friend, who told two friends, who told two friends.
Yeah, you can understand how it would creep out slowly and how everybody might know by morning. Maybe not to the degree that it happens in the movie, but you can understand how even Anthony Edwards is responsible for telling a good number of people who probably tell a bunch of people. Yeah, but I was going to say that's the great thing about the Denise Crosby character, is one of my favorite characters in this movie, because without her, there's no helicopter. Right. There's no like plan to flee to the desert
to save the great minds.
But you never exactly find out like who she is or what she does. All we know is like she's got that early brick size.
She's like the one that's giving it a little bit of credibility too, right? Like she's the person who makes them feel like maybe this could be true.
Yeah, she calls somebody and says, "Are we at DEFCON 3 or whatever? Like have we gone to forced readiness?" I think she asks. Something like that. So yeah,
she's the one who kind of makes them all freak out a little.
But that to me supports the theory that he's asleep, because that seems very like a dream sequence, that there would be in this diner a woman with a phone to the White House. Like she could just call, the equivalent of 911 and get Reagan on the phone. So that was, but maybe it was the shoulder pads were magic. That might have been the
she did have an 80s lady power suit on.
Didn't she? 100%. She had that Denise Crosby 80s haircut.
She looked great. Yeah. That scene is so interesting. Maybe a little off topic, but it feels like its own set piece. It could almost be.
It's like a mini movie. It's like
within a movie.
Yeah,
it's wonderful.
That whole thing in the diner.
Yeah, it's great.
That almost feels like it could be a play, really.
Exactly.
Right?
That's exactly. It does feel that way.
A half dozen crazy characters.
Is the world going to end in 90 minutes? Yeah. You could write some great dialogue.
I have that the Wilshire Boulevard was closed for 2 days for the filming of the climax, and he had to shoot additional pieces at his own expense. after principal photography had wrapped for the movie. That's
Wow.
commitment to your film.
Yeah.
That is commitment.
It is we were thinking about this the last time we watched it. It's a movie that gets a lot of bang for its buck because
Yes.
it's a very low budget movie and it really does not look like it. Like
Yeah.
that
No.
whole set piece at the
No.
end with the
amazing.
world
The
crumbling
helicopter.
down where he ends up in the sewer even.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, and
That's
there's
right.
that shot of him like climbing through the tunnel.
forgotten about that,
And he looks
yeah.
up at the grate and a dead guy falls on the
Yeah,
grate. Like it looks like a $50 million movie and
Yeah.
it was made for just a fraction of that.
And there's a couple of like, can we talk about that scene at the gas station with the fire? And that's a really, I mean,
that's not cheap.
That didn't seem cheap to me, and it is very effective. And then also when they crash, when they're in the mall, or they're in some kind of clothing store or mall, and the car crashes through the window. Both of those, I think, are really effective, possibly expensive scenes. I don't know, or if they were done cheaply, they were done very well.
Yeah. It's similar to Into the Night, which we were talking about a couple of weeks ago. It's a great portrait of nocturnal LA, and it's also, there were a lot of empty streets, which I think the low budget kind of like that's where Nocturnal LA kind of did it a favor. Yeah, that kind of like emptiness
Right.
that like downtown LA has at night, because there's not a lot of people living down there.
Yeah.
It's mostly
Right.
office buildings, and so it makes it's so weird when he stumbles on that over all night gym where he finds the helicopter pilot,
Yeah.
and that gym is just like the most 80s thing I've ever seen. It's neon.
Yeah, the colors.
That's
yeah.
another incident of feeling like a dream, where you just like stumble into this weird place that's colorful
Right.
and weird, and everybody's weird, and
And there's like naked people.
Naked
Yeah.
people.
stumbling
Yeah.
out
I mean,
doors and-
Again, tip of the cap to the director, I suppose. But how do you work? You said that you thought off mic, we were talking about this, that you felt that made sense. To me, the naked lady coming out of the tanning salon was simply there to put a naked lady on television.
Nope, you couldn't be more wrong. Here's why. First of all, nothing, if she's listening, no offense, but you would not have picked that naked lady if that was the reason that you
Okay, all right.
you were
I see what you're
doing it. That was like I think that was like a late middle-aged.
Oh, okay.
It just wouldn't have been Hollywood's selection, I think. I think it's, and I don't know, I have to ask Steve about this. he'd roll his eyes and be like, whatever. But I think it's there because it is so surprising. Like, it's like in the same way that like Apatow and McKay and Will Ferrell use like nude men as shock humor.
Okay.
Right?
All
Like all those movies have like one
Jason Segel at the
penis in
beginning
them.
of Forgetting
Yes, exactly.
Sarah Marshall.
Or Walk Hard has like a couple of,
Yeah.
there's some like shocking nudity in
Right,
those
right.
movies.
Something
You
about
just
Mary.
And
Okay.
it's just, you're like, where am I? What is this? It's an all night neon drenched gym.
Like
and
what?
all of a
Yeah.
sudden there's like a fully nude person in
maybe
your
it's
face.
just there to keep you off balance.
I think that's why it's there. I
Yeah.
mean, I've seen it so many times now that
Yeah.
I'm ready for it.
Yeah.
But I think if you were seeing it for the first time, you would be like, whoa, what? Why am I? Whoa, there's an all nude person here. What? And then the movie just races by it. It doesn't comment on it. And so it just becomes part of like the
chaos.
set
Not a
dressing of
focus.
that weird space
Right.
and the nightmare that is his night. Right? Like it's that whole place that whole gym is kind of like a nightmarish. It's like the
so
gym from
weird.
hell. It's a really
Yeah.
weird, scary.
And everybody in it is
Space.
a little bit unfriendly, just a little bit. I mean,
And they're
why
odd
would they
looking,
be
right?
friendly?
Like
Yeah,
Brian
they're odd
Thompson, who plays the helicopter
striking
pilot.
guy,
That-
yeah.
he's a Seattle actor. He played most famous probably as the villain in Cobra, Stallone's Cobra.
Although he also played a big role in the X-Files, which is what I knew him from. He is a very, if you guys should go look him up.
Yeah, he's one of the punks at the beginning of the Terminator
Yes, punk at the
too.
beginning
That
of
the
the
Terminator
Terminator.
shows
Oh,
up,
yeah.
steals the clothing. He's a great
recognizable
character
face.
actor, but he has
Yeah.
this incredibly interesting face.
Yes.
Yeah, that he's just innately frightening. That's why he makes a great
Yeah.
serial killer.
Yeah.
frankly, and it's just it's just part of that movie's descent into madness and hell, which we can call a dream logic, but you can also just call like the surreal, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to propose that perhaps for those of us who've only seen the film once, our reaction to the naked lady was a little bit different because,
Sure.
as I mentioned earlier, to me it just landed like 80s gratuitous nudity because I don't have quite the same backstory on this film that you do, but I see where you're going. It does, like you mentioned, those other films, there is a certain amount of jarring surrealness to. I mean, imagine if you were walking through even a gym and door opens and a fully nude person comes out, it would be startling, right? I can see that.
I'm so glad that we're talking about this so much, but don't you think if that was the case, that it would have to be titillating nudity? And there's nothing titillating about that or arousing about that nudity. So why would you put it in there as like token 80s nudity unless you were trying to turn somebody on?
Well, and to me, as I mentioned before, to me, it seemed like in the 80s, it wasn't necessarily for that. It was just to have. It was a checkbox. We have our gratuitous nudity. It didn't always make sense, at least to me. Maybe I'm not really vibing with the intent of the filmmaker. But the more we talk about this, the more I think Lisa's right. This was all a dream sequence. Then makes total sense.
Oh, man. I've turned into this all
just
dream
thinking
person.
as you guys were talking boobs. I feel like this
New
is
segment on the show.
the only
Right.
film of the 4 that we've talked about where I felt that he, you know how the other 3, I was like, just go home, like just leave. Like they
Right.
had agency, like they could leave this situation. He can't leave this situation because once we get so far, he kind of has to keep going. He can't turn back. And
He could leave the girl, though. That's always the choice he has. That he could
guess
leave
I-
Mare
well, I
Winningham.
didn't
Maybe
want
his
to.
age. Right.
Well,
Of
right.
course.
That's why it's
Yeah,
such
that's
a
the beauty
that's
of
why
it.
it's such a beautiful
Yeah.
love story, and that's
Yeah.
why
He does-
the last few. I think this movie is really deeply moving in the last
Yes.
10 minutes. Like
Yes.
the last few scenes
yes.
between him and Mare Winningham are absolutely beautiful love story. You know, sequences.
It's scary
Mike's
and it's
making faces
upsetting.
like we have lost our minds.
Yeah,
very
that is
upsetting,
exactly
though.
what I am feeling. Like, again, the dream theory makes more sense to me than that. But he did leave her several times.
But it was always with the intent of going back to get her, though. It was like, I'm going to go do this, and then I'm going to come back for you.
Right. So
Oh, yeah,
in
he was
the
always
middle of a
protecting her.
riot, you would just say, you stay here.
Yeah,
I'm
see,
going to go over here and then come
Mike
back.
is very much, you never split the party. Like, even
Never
at the
split the
grocery
party.
store,
Okay.
I'm like, you go over
Okay.
there and get that. I'll go over. Nope. We'll go get this together, and then we'll go get this together.
Got it.
So he doesn't like to split the party.
Understood. Right.
This is bad news for you, Christy, because he sends her up to the heliport, right, where presumably there's, you know, she's not going to be killed, while he wades into the violent masses
To get a
because he's
helicopter
trying
pilot,
to make
right.
sure
Yeah, I
he's trying
gotta
to
go with him to the
retrieve
violent
the
mass.
pilot. Yeah, exactly.
You're right.
Too bad, Christy.
Okay, if we're going to go down that road,
No.
just how many people do they think a Bell Jet Ranger can carry? Right? Just saying. And what is the range? I can tell you the range of a Jet Ranger is not sufficient to outrun anything.
Your nerd
right? And
card is
even if you
showing.
get to LAX, who's going to fly a plane? I mean, there's a
Bodybuilder.
lot.
We got our pilot.
Yeah, I don't think TWA just leaves the keys on a little eye hook.
No,
It's not under the
Denise
shade
Crosby
of
is
the-
at LAX. She's got the plane.
got
They
the-
just have to
okay.
get to LAX.
Yeah, but why
I mean,
would the
Mike's right. They're not going to
president let you-
outrun this.
No.
Like, it's if it's truly coming in 90 minutes, they're not going to get to LAX and then take off and be away before the
I mean, I
bomb
guess that's
drops.
part of the
Right.
feeling of the movie, right? Is like you have a feeling that you really want them to get away, but you're also kind of like,
You're like,
I don't know if
this-
it's
Well, this is the other thing that's another of the many pleasures of this movie is its pace and its
Yes.
editing. It's
Yeah.
It's just such a well cut film because it never slows for a moment. It's like once
You're
it
in
takes
it.
off, yeah. Once he gets that phone call, it's like a roller coaster.
Yep.
This movie.
Clock's
I
ticking.
think the other thing that's interesting about it, in that vein, I think, is it's out of the movies we've talked about this month. It's the one that takes place in the smallest area
Oh, yeah,
in geography.
yeah,
It's like
yeah.
all in the same neighborhood, which I feels unusual to me for an LA movie. It's like one, I think, neighborhood of
Yeah.
LA. It's kind of that Miracle Mile, Tar Pits area or whatever
Yeah.
it is. And it's all, and he kind of keeps coming back to the same places, which also brings me back to that dream logic thing. Like he keeps passing the same people, passing
Yes.
the same things. And to me, that feeds into that. I don't know if they're ever going to get out of this thing because they just can't get out of this neighborhood. They can't get away from these same places.
Right.
I don't know. That's something I noticed much more this time than others. And
It's-
that's different from the other movies. I think.
It's a really good point that you brought that up. More our segment Clock Talk outside
Right,
the
yes, this is
restaurant
important.
that is similar to but legally distinct from Bob's Big Boy,
Right.
they did have a prominently featured clock.
They do. That's a centerpiece of the movie, right?
Yeah.
And then the clocks show up in the department store again, right?
Oh,
they
yeah.
have
Right.
that whole
Yeah.
long sequence where they're in that little, like, it's like a clock department.
Yeah,
They're
it's-
surrounded by clocks.
Clocks
It is
everywhere.
like a 12-foot by 12-foot clock room
Yeah.
in this
Yep.
department store, which
Really
there's
well
a single bare light bulb hanging down.
You're right, yes.
And I think that's because the DP said we don't have enough light. We need more light. But that didn't make a ton of
China
sense
ball
to
was
me
quite
from
right.
an architectural standpoint. But wasn't that just a fun little clock room?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Well,
it
and
was
that's
neat.
the place, I think, where Anthony Edwards finally thinks, have I made a mistake? Did I make this all go down? Have I, like, essentially killed a bunch
Yeah.
of people? It's really interesting.
Right.
I want to shout out the score of this film.
Oh,
too,
gosh, yes.
Which it was kind of a mark of coolness in the 80s to have your score done by Tangerine Dream.
Yeah.
And if you have young listeners who have no idea who Tangerine Dream were, they were like the epitome of cool electronic music in
If
the
you
1980s.
like synthwave today,
It
you'll
was
love
like
Tangerine
there were like
Dream,
two names,
yeah.
Kraftwerk and Tangerine Dream,
Yeah.
who were a German trio of composers who just wrote this incredibly beautiful, moody, dreamy music. And they released entire albums essentially of instrumental music, but they also did a number of scores, and they
Yep.
always managed to do scores for really cool movies, like Michael Mann movies and films like this, like really interesting, idiosyncratic cult films.
Aren't they Risky Business?
Yes, they wrote the score for
Yeah.
Risky Business,
It's a
which is
cool
a beautiful
score,
score.
yeah.
They did Michael Mann's Thief. Yeah, they did a lot of movies. I think they did.
Are they Legend or is that somebody else?
Yeah, I think they did Legend. Yep. Yeah, it's a big part of what makes this movie feel like a dream.
Yeah.
Is that like
Very
floating,
dreamy stuff.
gauzy electronic music that floats all the way through it.
The colors in the movie with Tangerine Dream, it just like makes so much sense. The light and the colors that you see at the beginning through the whole movie all syncs up together for me.
It's a neo-noir. It's
Yeah.
part of what makes it fit in this yuppie nightmare cycle, right? Is that combination of genres, and noir is a huge part of this.
Yes.
When they released the special edition Blu-ray a few years ago, it was around about the same time that the film critic Walter Chaw released his book. He wrote a book about Miracle Mile, and they had all of this artwork commissioned for those projects. And it's just this beautiful kind of like Art Deco art portraying scenes from the movie. And it just works so perfectly with the tone of the film.
Yeah. This is sort of off topic, but it was just occurring to me. This might be Mare Winningham is not a manic pixie dream girl.
Not really
Right.
at all.
I mean, all the
Yeah, I didn't
the
see
movies we've
that.
been talking about this month, she's
Right.
like
Yeah.
maybe the only leading woman who's not really a femme fatale or
Right.
She
Yeah.
doesn't even know what's going
No,
on for
that's so
a good
interesting,
chunk of the
yeah.
movie because he's protecting her
Right.
from the
Yeah.
knowledge of what's about to happen.
One thing that I loved is kind of the tragic poetry of them having their kind of first date at the tar pits,
yes.
and then they basically die together
Yes.
in the tar pits.
very poetic.
I liked that bookend.
Yeah.
Well,
You know.
I actually have been to those tar pits, and the museum that's nearby is very cool, but the actual tar pit itself is exactly what it's described as. It is a
Yeah.
pit of black tar with some fiberglass mammoths that they put in there for contact.
Right.
But other than that, it's just a big pit of crude oil in the middle of a city.
Yeah.
Is the burbling, is that a true geothermal effect?
Yeah, there's some,
or have they-
some sort of gas like methane or something.
Yeah. Well, it's great because the way he uses it is to comment on, the history of the world beyond the human race's imprint on it, right? Like he's saying this was here long before we were here. It's going to be here long after the human race is gone. And then at the end of the movie, when they're in the helicopter and they're going down, he's telling her, you and I are going to be
They're gonna
a part
find
of
us
history.
someday.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
going to find us someday. They're going to put us in a museum, like
Right.
the one where we
Right.
met.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
heartbreaking
It's a
to me,
beautiful.
but like,
it's a
but
beautiful.
It's very poetic and lovely.
Yeah, it's a beautiful scene, and yeah, it's great that Miracle Mile area is quite lovely and kind of interesting, and it's this old old LA, which is, you know,
It had that feel to me, and I've never been there.
yeah,
but-
so much of LA feels like suburban sprawl, like the parts of the city. Even there's not a lot of LA that kind of has a real sense of history in a way that feels vintage and interesting. And Miracle Mile is part of it.
I mean, it
worked
even-
across the street from the tar pits for 2 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I worked in a building right across the street. And so I knew all these locations. And it is funny, like Lisa was saying, how he never gets anywhere. But that's
Yeah.
part of the absurdist comedy elements, which is something we haven't really talked about, which is that this movie is also pretty funny. There's a lot of comedy in this movie, dark comedy, but it's there. And one of the things I always thought was funny is that he's always in motion. And he's always trying to progress in getting away, and he never leaves like a 6-block area in the whole film.
Right. It very much had that feeling like, you know, going up a down escalator or something.
Yeah.
Like you're
I think that actually
or on a
happens at one
treadmill,
point,
like
doesn't
you're
it?
just not getting
Yeah,
anywhere.
there's a part
In the-
where
in
the
the
people
mall
are on
or the-
escalators.
where
Yeah.
he's like he's going up and
Yeah, he's
down.
climbing. It's the McKelty Williamson character's carrying his
Right.
sister, and he's carrying her up
that
the
was
escalator.
heartbreaking,
And
too.
But then the car on a sweeping overpass, it turns around and goes the wrong way.
Yep.
Oh,
Right. So there's even that
Yeah.
going on
Wow.
as well.
Okay, Steve's
Yeah.
a genius. I've just as
It's
we
kind of a
talk about
genius
this,
movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
yeah, it's
is
a
good.
perfect film. It's like
I
a film
agree,
that you would
yeah.
change for me. That I would change nothing about.
And for such
Yeah.
a small budget, like it's so incredible how good it is. Not that budget really matters, honestly, when it comes to being good or not. But
Yeah. Mike, was there any head trauma in this film?
The two bits that I made note of, and this could qualify under comedy as well. One is Harry walks headfirst into the door at the fake Bob's Big Boy, which I would not have
yeah.
believed, but I worked with someone who actually did that. So human beings do that.
Realistic. Okay.
And then the other is there's a great scene where a cyclist rides into an open car door. A very
Yes.
classic gag.
Yeah. And doesn't Anthony Edwards? This was such a striking thing to me. Don't they throw him out of the back of that truck? They're getting away
Yes.
from the diner, and he like ends up on the on ramp or off ramp of the freeway, and that
Right.
always is so striking to me because I feel like if that happened in LA to you, whoa, like I don't know.
Well,
That's
Well, and then he sees the
Coming
two
dead the two,
headlights
yeah.
that turn out to be
Yeah.
motorcycles.
It's so intense.
they split
Yeah.
around him.
I love that.
So brilliant.
Such a good scene. I assume there may be. Well, he didn't really fall on his head, so maybe that's not really head trauma.
Again, it can be implied.
Okay.
We don't always see it on screen.
Right.
And did those two get to have a kiss?
Smoochie, smoochie, smoochie. I actually have a couple listed. They kiss outside the Bob's Big Boy at 10:43, and then at 1:10:58, before he leaves her yet again, and then at 1:17:25, they kiss and perhaps a little boom chicka wow wow in the elevator before the
Oh,
end.
right. Yes. Yeah. What about in the tar pits at the end? Do they kiss then?
Oh,
I don't think so.
as
In
they're
the
going down?
I have this image in my head of them, but maybe that's me making it up because I want it to
I
happen.
don't
Yeah,
think they do.
I think
That's
so.
probably it.
Yeah. In a driving review, there was quite a bit of driving.
Yeah, I didn't make a whole lot of note. One thing I said was that 1960 Buick Electra really matches his Glenn Miller impersonator
So
vibe.
Glenn Miller, yeah.
That was pretty good.
Is that the car that Michael T. Williams that picks him up in with all the
Yes.
stolen
and
yeah.
I believe so.
stereos in the back? Yeah.
Oh, was that the Electra or not? No, I think the Electra was his character's ride in the beginning of the film. I could be wrong.
Okay.
Super fans, check me on that
Yeah.
one. And then I did say, even at a little before 5 in the morning, I do think there would be traffic on the highways in LA, not on the streets. I totally would buy that. But I thought, just because I have been up that early and there are bakers going to work and stuff, so I think there might be a little bit more traffic. But it worked great on that on-ramp scene. I definitely like that.
Yeah.
So scary.
All right. So we go to the numbers.
Let's go to the numbers.
Okay. I have the budget down 3.7 to 4 million, somewhere in there, and it made 1.1 domestically. So I don't know if there wasn't I don't know if they not tracking worldwide numbers in the 80s or
I don't know, but I can tell you that it found its audience on video and cable, and I'm sure it made a fortune on home video.
okay.
And it continues to be one of the most, it seems, I mean, Steve's a good part of this because Steve's a great champion for keeping the film alive. He does like a lot of film festivals and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And they keep releasing new Blu-rays and there's a new 4K of it coming out later in the year. And every time it gets a new release, like Steve makes new stuff for it. So yeah, it's really cool.
No, I always look on YouTube for interviews with the filmmakers because I like to hear the backstory of, their process and everything. And there was a lot for him. I couldn't find anything on David Mamet, but Steve's out there. And so I think it's great that he's championing his film. IMDb score is 7 out of 10. And critics love this film at 91%, while audiences are a little bit less at 73%, but still fresh. On Rotten Tomatoes, it's about an hour and a half, 127. It's rated R, and it's an action drama romance. It's Hemdale and Miracle Mile Productions. I assume that is that Steve's company, or is that a coincidence that it's
Miracle Mile Productions? I'm sure it's just an LLC. They create
Right.
these companies to protect the financiers legally from, anything that might be omitted, like music omissions or things like that.
okay. In 2016, it won the Best DVD Blu-ray Classic Film Release
Oh, there you go.
award at the Academy of Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Horror Films.
It's a great. I have it. I'll fully endorse. You should
Owning a copy.
own this movie. Yeah, and it's a great, especially if you're like a film student, because Steve puts a lot of stuff on his Blu-rays that. It's kind of like you can have a little film lesson with Steve, who is also a teacher. He teaches at various colleges.
I could see that from the interviews I saw.
Yeah.
It also won for Best Special Effects Digis Cantilonian International Film Festival, and it was nominated for the Grand Jury Prize at Sundance. I want to thank you both so much. This has been such a fun month.
Yes, wonderful.
We have
Seriously.
loved having you on. These are great movies. These are not movies we probably would have picked, but I'm
Nope.
so grateful, and I am going to go back and rewatch them. Join us next week when we're going to be talking about Jurassic Park. This is probably like your last opportunity to guess what the theme of the month is. Do you guys want to point them to your website or anything coming up, or do you guys want to promote anything?
Yeah, I mean, all of my work is at my website, which is just my name, dustinmorrow.com, and you can find what I'm up to there: short films, feature films, screenwriting, film scholarship, podcasting, etc.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
I'll have all that in the show notes.
Cool.
Lisa, do you want to
I
point
mean,
them to anything?
everything movie I've done has been with Dustin, so just go look at his stuff and keep listening to the Dodge Movie Podcast
Aw, thank you.
because it's great.
All right, everybody, and never forget.
Dodges never stop, and neither do the movies.
Thanks for listening to Dodge Movie Podcast with Christy and Mike Dodge of Dodge Media Productions. To find out more about this podcast and what we do, go to dodgemediaproductions.com. Subscribe, share, leave a comment, and tell us what we should watch next. Dodges never stop, and neither do the movies.